On the edge of the celestial realm, where golden clouds stretched as far as the eye could see, stood a small figure bathed in the glow of the setting sun. It was Nar-Tra, a young warrior with fiery red hair tied into 2 fierce buns, a yellow, empty necklace hanging around his neck, and a mischievous spark dancing in his eyes. Nar-Tra was unlike any other child. He was bold, energetic, and as fast as the wind itself, thanks to the Windfire Wheel, a legendary pair of spinning wheels that allowed him to soar through the sky at incredible speeds. It was his most treasured possession, a gift from the heavens and an extension of his very soul. That evening, Nar-Tra sat on the highest peak of Cloud Reach Mountain, letting his feet dangle above the endless sea of mist. His Windfire Wheel rested beside him, glowing faintly under the first shimmer of moonlight. The night breeze was cool, carrying the scent of blooming starflowers and the gentle murmur of distant rivers. Nar-Tra took a deep breath and smiled. Another peaceful night, he thought. But as the first star blinked into the sky, something felt different. A sudden gust of wind howled through the air, and the warmth from his Windfire Wheel vanished. Nar-Tra's heart skipped a beat. He turned to grab his weapon, but it was no longer whole. Instead of 2 perfectly balanced wheels, there were only 2 broken halves, lying lifelessly on the ground. A thin trail of golden energy flickered weakly between them, like a fading heartbeat. "What?" Nar-Tra gasped. His fingers trembled as he picked up the shattered pieces. His Windfire Wheel had never been damaged before, not by storms, lightning, or even the fiercest battles. Before he could make sense of it, the sky above him rumbled. A voice, deep and ancient as the mountains themselves, whispered through the wind. "To mend what is broken, seek what is lost. Fire and wind must find harmony once more." Nar-Tra's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" he called into the night, but the voice had already faded. Then, from the dark horizon, 2 lights flashed in opposite directions, one burning like molten lava, the other swirling like a silver storm. Nar-Tra felt a pull in his chest, as if his very soul was being split between them. Then, a vision bloomed before him, one half of the Windfire Wheel plunging deep into a burning lake, sinking beneath waves of magma and ash, while the other half was whisked away by the storm, carried higher and higher until it disappeared into the sky. A realization struck him. One half had fallen into the Valley of Fire, where flames roared like wild beasts in the darkness. The other had been swept away to the mountaintop, where the wind god himself kept watch over the skies. The Windfire Wheel could not exist in halves. Without both elements, wind and fire in perfect balance, its power would be lost forever. Nar-Tra clenched his fists. He had no choice. He had to retrieve both halves. But to do that, he would have to overcome 2 of the greatest forces in existence. In the Valley of Fire, he would have to face the fire spirits, ancient guardians of the lava lake who allowed no one to enter their domain unless they wielded the legendary ancient fire, the only energy strong enough to withstand the burning depths. On the storm-crowned summit, he would meet the wind god, who would test him in a different way. He would not grant Nar-Tra the missing half of his weapon unless he could command the winds themselves, weaving them into a perfect melody that could unlock the hidden door where the Windfire Wheel was kept. But there was one thing that troubled Nar-Tra most of all. Even if he succeeded, even if he retrieved both halves, something was wrong with the Windfire Wheel. He could feel it in his bones. The 2 forces no longer moved as one. He had always thought wind and fire were meant to be together, but now they rejected each other. If he could not find a way to balance them, the weapon might never return to its true form. Nar-Tra gritted his teeth and rose to his feet. He had faced danger before, sea monsters, mountain demons, even the wrath of the gods themselves. But this was a battle not just against the elements, but against something deeper, the balance within himself. With the first light of dawn streaking across the sky, Natra summoned his courage and took his first step toward destiny. Journey to the Valley of Fire. As the first light of dawn spread across the sky, Natra took a deep breath and leaped into the air. Even without the full power of his windfire wheel, he could still move with speed and agility, bounding between the clouds as he made his way toward the Valley of Fire. The celestial realm faded behind him, and the world below stretched wide, rolling green hills, sparkling rivers, and far beyond, the jagged mountains where the Valley of Fire smoldered under a thick blanket of black smoke. Natra could feel the heat even from here. The valley was a world of flames where rivers of molten lava twisted and turned, glowing bright as the sun. Massive obsidian cliffs jutted from the ground like the fangs of a slumbering beast, and at its heart lay the burning lake where the missing half of the windfire wheel had fallen. Natra clenched his fists. This was no ordinary lake. It was said to be home to the fire spirits, guardians of the ancient flames, who allowed no intruders to pass. The air shimmered with their presence, and as he landed at the valley's edge, he could already sense their fiery eyes watching him. "I don't have time for games," Natra muttered, brushing soot from his clothes. "I'll get the windfire wheel and I'll be out before they even notice." He stepped forward, and the ground erupted beneath him. The fire spirits awakened flames, coiled and twisted from the earth, forming into fiery figures with glowing eyes. They stood tall, their bodies made of dancing embers and molten rock. "Who dares disturb the burning lake?" their voices thundered, shaking the very air. Natra gritted his teeth, but forced himself to stay calm. He had expected this. "I'm Natra," he declared. "My windfire wheel is at the bottom of the lake. I'm taking it back." The largest fire spirit stepped forward, its eyes flickering like twin suns. "The windfire wheel has fallen into our domain. It is beyond your reach." Natra narrowed his eyes. "Oh, yeah? We'll see about that." He rushed forward, his movements swift as the wind, leaping over molten cracks in the ground. But the fire spirits were faster than he had expected. Flames surged toward him, forcing him to dodge left and right. Every time he got close, a wave of searing heat pushed him back, blocking his path. He needed a new plan. Then he remembered the words from the night before. To mend what is broken, seek what is lost. Fire and wind must find harmony once more. Natra frowned. What did that mean? The fire spirits weren't just protecting the lake, they were protecting something inside it, something older than the windfire wheel itself. And suddenly, he knew. The ancient fire legends spoke of an ancient fire, a flame so powerful that it could burn without consuming, a fire that did not destroy but balanced and strengthened everything it touched. If Natra wanted to retrieve his weapon, he couldn't fight fire with fire. He had to prove himself worthy of the flame. Taking a deep breath, Natra did something unexpected. He stopped fighting. Instead of dodging the next attack, he stood his ground. The flames rushed toward him, but instead of resisting, he let them wash over his skin like a warm breeze. He did not burn. The fire spirits hesitated. Natra closed his eyes and reached deep within himself. He embraced the heat, letting it become a part of him instead of something to be feared. And then, a spark of golden fire bloomed in his palm. It was small at first, but it grew, shining with a light that was neither too wild nor too weak. The ancient fire. The fire spirits let out a low, rumbling sound, not of anger, but approval. "You understand now," the largest one said. "Fire is not just destruction, it is also light, warmth, and renewal." The flames parted, revealing a glowing path leading into the depths of the lake. With steady steps, Natra walked forward. Beneath the molten waves, resting upon a platform of cooled obsidian, was the first half of his windfire wheel, glowing with a heat that no ordinary warrior could withstand. But Natra was no ordinary warrior. He reached out, and as his fingers closed around the wheel, the ancient fire merged with it, reigniting its power. One half was his once more. But his journey was far from over. The storm-crowned summit. With the first half of the wind-fire wheel secured, Natra wasted no time. He soared back into the sky, heading toward the storm-crowned summit, where the wind god resided. The higher he climbed, the colder the air became. The sky darkened and the winds howled like restless spirits, twisting and turning in violent spirals. Natra shivered. This was no ordinary mountain. At its peak, tucked between clouds, stood the Temple of the Wind, its silver gates gleaming in the moonlight. And at the entrance, waiting for him, was the wind god himself. He was a towering figure with robes of shifting mist, eyes deep as the sky, and a staff that hummed with the song of the wind. "Natra," the wind god greeted, his voice like a breeze through the trees. "You seek the second half of your weapon." Natra nodded. "Yeah, and I need it back." The wind god tilted his head. "Then show me your command over the wind." The test of harmony. The wind. God raised his staff, and suddenly a great storm erupted. Winds tore through the sky, twisting into a mighty tornado. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and Natra found himself fighting to stay airborne. The windfire wheel had always guided his flight, but now he was at the mercy of the storm. "Balance the wind," the wind god commanded. "Make it sing." Natra gritted his teeth. The wind was wild, uncontrollable, pushing him in every direction. Then he remembered what he had learned in the Valley of Fire. Fire was not just destruction, it needed balance. Wind, too, was not just chaos. It could be a melody, a dance, a song. Closing his eyes, Natra stretched out his arms. Instead of fighting the wind, he moved with it. He listened to the low hum of the storm, the soft whistle of the currents, the rhythm hiding beneath the chaos. And then he wove them together. He guided the winds like an orchestra, shaping them into a perfect, harmonious melody. The storm softened. The tornado unraveled, revealing a hidden chamber deep within the clouds, where the second half of the windfire wheel rested. Natra reached forward and took it. As the two halves reunited, they glowed brilliantly, but something was wrong. The moment they touched, the forces of fire and wind clashed violently, threatening to spiral out of control. Natra staggered back. The windfire wheel was unstable, and unless he could find a way to balance its power, it might never be whole again. The clashing elements, fire and wind at war. The two halves of the windfire wheel floated before Natra, sparking violently, flames and winds raging against each other in an uncontrollable tempest of destruction. The moment they touched, firestorms erupted and gale-force winds twisted around them, pushing Natra back. He clenched his fists, watching as his own weapon, his own power, refused to be whole. It wasn't just broken physically. Something inside it was out of balance. The fire wheel burned too wildly, desperate to consume everything in its path. The wind wheel howled with uncontrolled force, resisting, pushing away, refusing to be contained. Without balance, the weapon would destroy itself, and possibly him along with it. Natra landed on a floating platform of stone in the middle of the sky, gripping his chest as the energy waves pulsed through him. His breathing was heavy, his thoughts were spinning. The wind god watched in silence from his temple, his long robes fluttering in the soft wind that surrounded him. Then he spoke. "Fire and wind are both forces of nature, Natra. One cannot exist without the other, but they must be tamed or they will turn upon themselves. Do you understand why your weapon refuses to be whole?" Natra's eyes flashed with frustration. "I don't have time for riddles. I came all this way, fought through fire and storms, and now my own power is fighting against me." The wind god sighed. With a wave of his staff, the storm above them stilled, and the chaos of the floating windfire wheel paused just for a moment. "Then let me show you." And with those words, the wind god touched Natra's forehead. A glimpse into the past, the birth of the windfire wheel. The moment the wind god's staff touched his forehead, Natra's vision blurred, and suddenly he was no longer standing on the floating stone. He was in a different time, a different place. A golden palace stretched out before him, its pillars made of storm clouds, its floors flickering like the surface of a lake in sunlight. And at the center of this celestial hall stood a man with a face both familiar and unfamiliar, his teacher, Tai Yi Zhenren. Natra watched, his heart pounding, as his master held a molten piece of fire in one hand and a shimmering swirl of wind in the other. His expression was calm, focused, and wise. "Fire cannot be controlled by force," Tai Yi spoke softly, "and wind cannot be captured by will, but together they can create something greater than themselves." With a graceful motion, he brought the two elements together. The flame curled into the wind like a dance. The wind wrapped around the fire like an embrace. Neither fought against the other, nor tried to dominate. They became one, and in that moment the wind-fire wheel was born, a perfect harmony of two opposite forces. Natra's eyes widened. This was how the windfire wheel was meant to be. But now, it was broken. And it wasn't just because of the physical damage, it was because he was out of balance. The vision faded. Natra found himself back in the storm-crowned sky, the wind god standing before him, waiting. Natra swallowed hard, his hands trembling. I don't understand," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "The fire and wind used to work together. They were always balanced before. So why?" The wind god's gaze softened. "Because you have changed, Natra." The battle within, Natra's inner struggle. Natra froze. The words hit something deep inside him, something he didn't want to acknowledge. He had always been reckless, impulsive, and fiery by nature, but he had also been guided, watched over, trained to control that fire. And yet, after everything he had been through, after losing his physical form, after fighting to reclaim his freedom, after facing loss and anger and frustration, had he lost himself? He looked at his own reflection in the glowing embers of the windfire wheel. His fiery hair flickered wildly. His fists were clenched too tightly. His breathing was sharp and fast, too rushed, like a storm out of control. And then he realized, the wind-fire wheel wasn't rejecting balance, he was. Fire without restraint becomes destruction. Wind without purpose becomes chaos. And a warrior who lets his emotions spiral out of control will lose himself. Natra let out a slow breath. He had been fighting the fire spirits, fighting the wind god's test, fighting his own impatience. But maybe it wasn't a fight he needed at all. Maybe he needed to listen. Maybe he needed to breathe. Closing his eyes, Natra reached within himself, deeper than he ever had before. He listened to his own heartbeat, the rise and fall of his breath, the silent whisper of the wind around him, the warmth of the fire inside him. And slowly, he let go. He let go of his frustration. He let go of his doubts. He let go of the fear that he wasn't strong enough to control his own power. And as he did, something shifted, reuniting the wind-fire wheel, a test of harmony. The two halves of the wind-fire wheel, which had been clashing just moments ago, began to calm. The fire dimmed, its flames flickering gently instead of raging wildly. The wind softened, its currents flowing smoothly instead of lashing out in chaos. Natra opened his eyes. The wind god nodded. Now, try again. Natra reached forward, his fingers wrapped around both halves of the wind-fire wheel, and this time, they did not fight him. Instead, they came together gently, the golden embers of fire weaving into the soft currents of wind. Natra spun the wheel in his palm. It hummed with perfect balance, not too wild, not too weak, just right. The wind-fire wheel was whole again, and so was he. The final words of the wind. God. As Natra held the restored weapon, the wind god stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You have done well," he said. "But remember, balance is not something you achieve once and never again. It is something you must choose every day, every moment." Natra nodded, his grip tightening around the windfire wheel. "I understand now." The wind god smiled. With a wave of his staff, the storm around them dissipated, revealing the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. Natra took a deep breath of fresh, clear air. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. But deep in his heart, he knew. This was only the beginning. For the real test was yet to come. The final trial, the rising storm. Natra held the restored windfire wheel in his hands, feeling its pulse of balanced energy between fire and wind. The storm had calmed, the valley lay quiet, and even the wind god had given his final words. But as the first golden rays of dawn touched the sky, the stillness was shattered by a low, rumbling growl. The ground trembled beneath Natra's feet. He turned just in time to see the valley of fire erupt once more. The lava lake boiled violently, and the firestorm that he had thought he had conquered rose anew, stronger than before. But this time, it was not just the valley reacting. Above him, the winds howled, twisting into a furious tornado, one more massive than anything he had faced before. The wind god's expression darkened. "The storm is not over, Natra." Natra gritted his teeth, gripping his weapon tightly. "What's happening?" "I already restored the balance." The wind god's robes fluttered in the rising winds as he raised his staff. "Balance is fragile, young warrior. The forces you wield are ancient and powerful. They do not simply obey because you will them to. You have learned to balance them in your hands, but now you must prove you can balance them in the face of true chaos." Natra's heart pounded. He had come so far, retrieved the broken halves, faced the fire spirits, conquered the wind god's test, and reunited his wind-fire wheel. But now, the ultimate test was before him, and this time it would be a battle not just of strength, but of mastery. Fire and wind, unleashed. The ultimate battle. A crack of thunder split the sky as the lava lake surged upward, forming a massive serpent of fire, its molten body coiling and twisting with untamed rage. From the storm above, a great eagle of wind and lightning emerged, its wings stretching across the heavens, its eyes glowing like twin suns. Two elemental forces, two embodiments of chaos, and Natra stood between them. The fire serpent hissed, its voice an echo of the flames. "You would dare to control us, boy? Fire is destruction, fire is power." The storm eagle shrieked, its wings beating furiously, sending cutting gales toward Natra. "Wind is freedom, wind is boundless. You will never command the storm." The two forces clashed in the sky, sending shockwaves of fire and wind in all directions. Natra leaped back, avoiding a stream of molten lava just as a hurricane-force gust nearly knocked him off the floating rock he stood on. He clenched his jaw. This was his final challenge. He had to tame the fire and the wind, or be consumed by them. The power within, the warrior's realization. Natra focused his breath, ignoring the raging battlefield around him. He had already learned the lesson. Fire and wind must exist together. They were not enemies. They were not meant to be conquered or forced into submission. They were meant to be understood. He thought back to the moment his master forged the wind-fire wheel, the moment when fire and wind danced in harmony instead of battle. He had been fighting this whole time, but maybe he didn't need to. Natra's grip loosened on the wind-fire wheel. Instead of forcing the two halves together, he let them move. He let them breathe. And suddenly, he understood. The dance of balance, taming fire and wind. The fire serpent lunged toward him, its molten body curling through the air, ready to consume him whole. The storm eagle dived, its talons sparking with lightning, prepared to tear through the battlefield. Natra closed his eyes, just for a moment. And when he opened them, he moved, not as a warrior fighting a battle, but as a warrior embracing the storm. The wind-fire wheel spun in his hand, and he leaped toward the fire serpent, its searing heat pressing against his skin. But this time, he did not strike it down. Instead, he spun with it. He let the flames flow around him, guiding their energy, shaping them, letting them swirl into the motion of his wind-fire wheel. The fire serpent roared, its body melting into the dance, its chaos turning into powerful, controlled movement. Natra landed just as the storm eagle's shadow covered him. The winds howled, but Natra lifted the wind-fire wheel above his head. Instead of resisting the storm, he moved with it. The currents bent around his weapon, not fighting against him, but flowing into the perfect spiral of wind and fire. And in that moment, the fire serpent and the storm eagle let out one final cry. And then they became one. The birth of true balance. The wind-fire wheel ascends. Natra stood in the center of the battlefield, his wind-fire wheel glowing with renewed power. The storm had ceased. The lava lake had calmed. The wind-fire wheel hovered in his palm, no longer two forces clashing, but one harmonized energy. The wind god approached, his expression unreadable. "You have done it, Natra." Natra looked down at his weapon, feeling its warmth and coolness at once. He had not conquered fire. He had not tamed the wind. He had become one with them. And because of that, he had achieved true mastery. The wind god's final words. The wind god raised his staff and the sky opened, the last remnants of the storm dispersing into a peaceful dawn. Natra, you have faced your own chaos and found your balance. But remember, this is not the end. This is only the beginning of your journey. Natra smiled, his grip firm on the wind-fire wheel. "I understand now," he said. "Balance isn't something I achieve once. It's something I choose. every time I wield this power." The wind god nodded in approval. "Then go, warrior. The world will need your strength. But even more than that, it will need your wisdom." A new dawn, a new path. As Natra left the temple of the wind god, he looked back one last time. The mountain peak now bathed in golden morning light. His journey was far from over, but now he knew who he was. Not just a warrior, not just a fighter, but a guardian of balance. And with the windfire wheels spinning in his hands once more, Natra took his first step toward his next adventure. The end, or perhaps the beginning. A journey's end, a new beginning. Natra stood at the edge of the mountain temple, looking down at the winding path leading back toward the Valley of Fire. The dawn light painted the landscape in hues of gold and orange, and for the first time in a long while, the world felt still. He turned the windfire wheel in his hands, watching the soft, gentle glow that now radiated from it. It was no longer a chaotic force of clashing elements, no longer something unstable or destructive. It had become whole again, and so had he. Natra took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air. His journey had been long and difficult. He had braved the Valley of Fire, where flames roared like dragons, and had faced the howling winds of the mountaintop, where the sky had tried to sweep him away. He had fought against the very forces of nature, only to realize that the true power of the wind-fire wheel lay not in domination, but in understanding. Now, he was ready to return home. But before he left, the wind god stepped forward one last time, his flowing robes dancing with the breeze. "You have found the harmony within your power, Natra." His voice was deep, like a distant storm rolling across the sky. "But you must remember, balance is not something you achieve once and never again. It is a path you must walk every day." Natra nodded, gripping his newly restored weapon a little tighter. "I understand," he said. "Fire needs wind to burn, but wind must also guide fire so that it does not become reckless." The wind god smiled, a rare sight, and a soft gust of wind circled Natra, as if giving him one final blessing. "Go now, young warrior. The world awaits you." The return home. A warm welcome. Natra descended the mountainside, following the winding paths that led back toward the Valley of Fire. With every step, he could feel the warmth of the windfire wheel pulsing in his hands, no longer an untamed force, but an extension of himself. The once roaring flames of the valley were now calm, their embers flickering softly in the early morning light. The fire spirits, once hostile and wary, watched him with quiet respect as he passed. He had proven himself, not by defeating them, but by understanding their nature. When he reached the edge of the valley, he saw a familiar figure waiting for him. Tai At Chan Nahan, his mentor, the one who had once gifted him the windfire wheel, stood with his hands folded behind his back, watching him with eyes full of pride and wisdom. "Natra." His voice was calm, carrying no judgment, only curiosity. "I see you have returned, and I see the windfire wheel has changed." Natra stepped forward and held out his weapon. The metallic rings gleamed, their once separate energies now woven seamlessly together. "It's whole again," Natra said, his voice quiet but certain. "And so am I." Tai At Channan studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You have grown," he finally said. "You left as a boy wielding power without control, and you have returned as a warrior who understands balance." Natra smiled. "I had a good teacher," he said. Tai Achan Nun let out a small chuckle, his eyes twinkling. I simply showed you the path. You were the one who chose to walk it. The warmth in his voice filled Natra's chest with something lighter than fire, softer than wind. A feeling of home. A night of celebration. That evening a great feast was held in the village to welcome Natra home. Lanterns flickered in the trees, casting golden light over the gathered people. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts, sweet lotus cakes, and warm tea. Children ran through the streets waving small pinwheels that spun in the wind, their laughter ringing through the night like bells of joy. Natra sat beside his mentor, watching the villagers dance and celebrate, their voices blending into a song of life and harmony. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. As he sipped from a cup of steaming tea, an elderly woman approached, carrying a beautifully woven red silk cloth. "For you," she said, her wrinkled face kind and warm. "A gift from the village to honor your return." Natra took the cloth and unfolded it, revealing an embroidered image of himself, standing atop a mountain, holding the wind-fire wheel, with fire and wind swirling in perfect unity around him. A lump formed in his throat. He had once thought of himself as a reckless warrior, always fighting, always pushing forward. But now he saw himself as they saw him, a protector, a guardian, a bringer of balance, and for the first time, he truly believed it. The final lesson, the whisper of the wind, the glow of the flame. As the celebration wound down, Natra slipped away from the festivities and made his way to a quiet hill outside the village. The stars above twinkled like tiny lanterns, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. He sat down, planting the wind-fire wheel beside him in the grass, and closed his eyes. He listened, not just to the sounds of the night, but to the heartbeat of the elements around him. He could feel the fire burning steadily within him, no longer wild and uncontrolled, but a steady warmth that fueled his spirit. And he could feel the wind lifting around him, no longer pushing him in all directions, but guiding him, carrying his energy forward. They were one. The journey had changed him. And even though many more adventures lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready. Natra picked up the windfire wheel, twirling it gently in his hand, and let out a quiet laugh. "Let's see where the wind takes us next," he whispered. The breeze rustled the trees in response, as if answering his call. And with that, Natra rose to his feet, turned toward the path ahead, and stepped forward into the unknown. The end, for now. Drifting into tranquility. The night sky stretched endlessly above, a vast canvas of twinkling stars and soft silver moonlight. The village lay still, wrapped in the peaceful embrace of night. The lanterns that had glowed so brightly during the evening festivities had now dimmed, their warm light flickering gently like tiny fireflies preparing for sleep. Natra sat atop the quiet hill, the windfire wheel resting beside him in the cool grass. The breeze whispered through the trees, carrying the soft rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. He took a slow, deep breath, feeling the night air fill his lungs, and let it out gently. It was time to rest. He had journeyed far, faced challenges both great and small. And now, all that remained was stillness. A moment to reflect, to breathe, and to embrace the warmth of peace. "Balance," he murmured to himself, letting the words settle in his heart like a feather drifting down from the sky. And so, with a final glance at the horizon, he closed his eyes, allowing the rhythm of the night to guide him into rest. A soothing breath, Inhaling calm, exhaling worries. Now, my dear listener, let's prepare to wind down, just like Na-tra. Find a cozy place to rest, whether it's your bed, a soft blanket, or a warm little corner that feels safe and snug. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. The world outside is quiet now, the breeze is gentle, and you're safe. Let's breathe together. Inhale deeply through your nose. Feel the cool, fresh air filling your chest like a soft, warm light. Hold for a moment. Let the warmth settle. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth, letting go of any thoughts, any worries. Let's do it again. Breathe in. Feel the warmth of fire, steady and glowing. Breathe out, like a gentle wind carrying away any tension, any restlessness. With each breath, you feel lighter, as if you are floating gently on a cloud, just like the winds that carried Na-tra to the mountaintop temple. Guided. Visualization. A journey through the night sky. Now, let your mind drift, like a feather caught in a soft evening breeze. Imagine you are standing at the top of a peaceful mountain, just like Na-tra. The world below is quiet, bathed in the glow of the moon and stars. A soft, golden flame flickers gently beside you, warm but not too hot, glowing like a small lantern guiding you home. The wind is calm and gentle, brushing against your skin, carrying the whispers of dreams and the comfort of the night. Above you, the stars twinkle like tiny fireflies, winking down at you as if they know a secret just for you. And then a voice, soft, kind, speaks in the wind. You have done well today. You have walked far. You have learned, grown, and shined like the stars above. Now it is time to rest, to let go, and to dream. The warm flame beside you flickers softly, its light wrapping around you like a cozy blanket. The wind sings a lullaby, humming gently through the trees, carrying you toward the land of soft dreams and quiet adventures. Letting go. A bedtime affirmation. Now, as you lie still, feeling the weight of the day melting away, let's fill your heart with warm, kind words. Repeat them silently in your mind, or whisper them softly. I am safe. I am warm and cozy. I am strong, like the fire that glows gently inside me. I am calm, like the soft wind that carries me to sleep. I am loved. Let these words settle in you like little stars twinkling in the sky of your heart. Drifting deeper, a floating sensation. Now, let's imagine you are lying on a soft cloud, just like Na-tra when he soared across the sky. The cloud is fluffy and warm, carrying you gently through the night. Above, the stars watch over you like tiny fire spirits keeping you safe. Below, the world is quiet, wrapped in the gentle hush of dreams and moonlight. With each breath, you sink deeper and deeper into the cloud, feeling lighter, cozier, calmer. Your legs relax, soft and still. Your arms feel weightless, like they are floating. Your eyelids grow heavier, sleepier, ready to close. Final whisper. The night is your friend. As the night wraps around you like a warm silk blanket, remember this. The wind will always carry you forward. The fire inside you will always keep you strong. And you, just as you are wonderful, brave, and loved. Now, let yourself drift deeper and deeper into the soft, glowing dreamscape, where the fire glows gently, where the wind hums a lullaby, where the adventure continues in your dreams. Sleep well, little one. The end.